I begin today with a few administrative announcements. Next week on Thursday, I'm involved in a day-long conference on domestic violence and our faith community, so I will be recording this earlier, probably on Wednesday. Secondly, the Thursday before Pesach, the Thursday of Chol HaMoed Pesach, because it's a Shabbat and Pesach, but we read the Torah that is connected to the day of Pesach, I will not be recording anything. I'm just taking that particular Thursday off from this shiur, as there's lots of other things going on, and I will be involved in that. It is that spring season, and lots of programs coming up, lots of variations, so there probably will be ongoing irregularities in the timing of this particular shiur. For this week, it is entitled Parshat Shemini. Why don't we just play it safe always? I will begin this week's discussion with some lessons from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In this week's Parsha, the Torah discusses laws of ritual impurity. Food that comes in contact with a source of impurity is rendered ritually impure. There are two necessary conditions before a food item is susceptible to contamination. 1, the food in question must be fit for human consumption, and 2, it must first come in contact with water or one of the other 7 liquids indicated. Through the many additional details, we may find ourselves scratching our heads and wondering, so what's the point of all this? And trust me, as I am now studying the various laws of Tum'ah in the Mishnah Torah, I'm really scratching my head a lot and asking that question. Here's where the Lubavitcher Rebbe responds to our quizzical looks. In his teachings, we learn as follows. Man is a synthesis of body and soul. The Torah that instructs and inspires one's life, likewise, possesses both a physical element as well as a conceptual spiritual side. The body of Torah is its legal code and pragmatic guide to daily living. Its soul is the inner dimension of these laws, which addresses the internal world of the human mind and heart, and man's, the person, all of our relationship with our Creator and our purpose in life. This is true as well of the laws regarding the ritual impurity of food. These too have a moral and spiritual application to our lives beyond the physical act of eating. The first law, recounted above, that only food that is fit for human consumption is open to contamination, expresses the idea that the loftier a thing is, the more vulnerable it is to corruption. Animal fodder is of a limited potential. Equally limited are its negative uses, as an example. But the food that drives the human mind and heart can be the instrument of tremendous achievement. Conversely, it may also fuel the most destructive of endeavors. The same applies to all of life, continuing the teaching of the Lubavitcher Rebbe here. A person may choose to play it safe and avoid anything touched by controversy, risk, or the possibility of failure. Anything that may challenge one's spiritual purity. But in doing so, that person also disavows the most lofty of that person's potential, the vulnerable but invaluable human food resources of his life. The second law specifies that food becomes susceptible to contamination only after having come in contact with a liquid. In other words, simply being fit for human consumption is not enough. Unless the food item has been wetted, it does not attain the high degree of potential that is indicated by the possibility of impurity. In other words, the higher the potential for misuse or impurity or contamination, if we can overcome those and do what we do properly, the higher the reward, or the higher the level that we may reach in our actions. What are the specialties of the liquid state that would make this system work? That in order to be in a position to truly realize one's potential, or the food's potential, it must assume some kind of liquid quality, therefore putting itself at risk for contamination. The Rebbe continues, bringing science and religion and all that we are together. 3 characterizations of a liquid are considered here. 1, a liquid can be an adhesive. 2, a liquid can be a conveyor. And 3, a liquid always seeks the lowest point of a terrain. Anybody who's watered their plants and you see the water automatically going to the bottom and coming out the bottom of the pot, you understand what this is. With the addition of liquid, powder becomes a paste. Clay becomes a pot. Flour, Flour, becomes a loaf of bread. Liquid is thus the unifier, bonding the dry particulars to a cohesive whole. If you want to actualize what this means and think about it, really sort of meditate on its meaning, consider that many of our Chabad friends, when they are eating matzah for Pesach, will have a plastic bag under their chin so that the matzah does not fall and become contaminated by anything. Yet, obviously, when you eat the matzah, your saliva will change the state of the matzah. But that distinction becomes an important one in terms of the use of the matzah and the eating of the matzah. While food provides nourishment for our bodies, it would be utterly useless without the fluids that carry it to the body's every limb and cell. In the words of the Gemara, he who eats without drink, his food is poison. And of course, we know from the science, from all the health information we're getting, that to keep our bodies hydrated is critical, that we must drink water, that we must use liquid to accompany our meals, and that this has an important quality and an important result for our own health. She says as she drinks her hot tea. In other words, when transportation and integration is needed, be it in the human body or in a river valley, water is the medium of conveyance. Finally, the solid is immovable and inflexible. It clings to its station, descending to levels lower than itself only when forcibly dragged down. The liquid, however, naturally flows downward, seeping through the slightest of openings to transport itself from the highest elevations to the lowest plains. Similarly, teaches the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the dry individual is egocentric, stagnant, and jealous of his position, zealous for his position. One's life as a dry individual is a series of localized deeds and achievements which don't necessarily have any effect beyond their immediate time and place, and which may not leave a lasting imprimatur either on their performer or on those impacted by the actual deed. This person stands alone. This dry individual shuns connection and adhesion with his fellows, particularly with those who are different than him, or those who he may consider, or others may consider, to be not of his station in life. On the other hand, the fluid individual is the one who knows that he who eats without drink, his food is poison. A thought learned, a goal achieved, must never remain confined to a specific place and within defined parameters. It must affect one's entire person and pervade one's every thought and experience. This individual also extends the fluidity of life, where this person absorbs the thinking, absorbs the ideas, interacts with others, sees themselves as part of a whole, and understands that he will give to that hole and he will receive from that hole. He does not remain confined to a specific place and its parameters. Rather, he is part of the whole. He unites with others so that their endeavors should fuse to make a cohesive whole. Understanding im ein ani li mili. If I'm only for myself, ukshani la'atzmi ma'ani. If I'm not for myself, who am I? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So that balance has to be achieved. And as water, this individual flows from a high place to the lowest of places. He applies his most sublime experiences to the mundane particulars of everyday life. And he relates to every man, every person, every being, every woman, every child, every individual, regardless of if they have disabilities or differences or gender diversity or neurodiversity or sexuality diversity, what have you, as their equal, regardless of anything that differentiates that person from himself. This evokes the station of the prophet and his vision, which is an important part of the voices to which we respond in our Jewish souls. And this will be represented in the Haftarah of Yechezkel for this portion, for this Parsha. But we must remember that while not playing it safe opens new opportunities and possibilities for us, we must conform to the parameters of our lives as dictated, or there are profound consequences. In other words, Torah, looking at both the body, the law, and the spirituality, which Chabad works very hard to bring to all of us, among others. We must remember that the laws are there to allow us to be fluid. In other words, we go out there, we interact with the world, we are doing all the things we're doing, and we are holding on to our core. Let us turn to the third aliyah of our Parsha. After Moshe and Aharon bring their specifically dictated offerings, and immediately before we confront the details and specificities of kashrut and cleanliness and impurities that can contaminate our lives, we read, Vayichu b'nei Aharon Nadav and Avihu ish maqtato, vayitnu bahem esh, vayasimu aleha ketoret, vayakrivu lifnei Hashem esh zara, asher lo tziva otam. We can't be too fluid. And Aharon's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his pan, put fire in them, and placed incense upon it, and brought it before the Lord, an esh zara, a strange fire, which God had not commanded them. The fire goes forth before God and consumes them, and they die before God. Moshe says to Aharon, Hu asher diber Hashem lemor, bikrovai akadesh v'alpanei kol ha'am achabed v'yidam Aharon. This is what God spoke. I will be sanctified by those that are near to me, that do what I tell them, and before all the people I will be gathered. And then we have these very strange words, Vayidam Aharon, and Aharon was quiet. Now remember, his sons have died. We're reviewing this from an earlier chapter, clearly. And what we're being reminded here is, yes, we may be inspired to take chances and not always default to the safety position. One could make the point that Nadav and Avihu took chances. But, and there are limits, and this does not in any way convey permission for a free-for-all. I'm a liquid person. I just let everybody and anything in me. I don't have limits. I don't have any restrictions. No, that's not what we're talking about. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono L'Shalom, teaches that this Parsha represents the climax of the long narrative that began in Sefer Shemot, chapter 25, with the command to construct the sanctuary. It celebrates the day its service was begun. What should have been a joyous occasion turns into tragedy. And instead of a celebratory tone, we begin with, when Aharon's sons die, after bringing the Esh Zara, this strange fire, before God. Then, immediately after this, we continue with an extensive account of the dietary laws, specifically what animals, fish, and birds may be eaten. It is noteworthy that we often have additional laws after a misdeed. If you look at legal codes and you look at history and you interface them, you will find that this is not an uncommon phenomenon. What did Nadav and Avihu specifically do that brought us to this point where we are given these very specific and particular laws about what to eat, what not to eat, and how what we eat must be pure, as we ourselves must be? And notice these laws will be amplified significantly in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, in the Mishnah Torah, and elsewhere. The tragedy of Nadav and Avihu, according to Rabbi Lord Sachs, is that they made the mistake of acting like the prophets. Remember those prophets that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about? Prophets have the voice of God in them and know what to do. And Nesh Sarah indicates that that's not the case. They were priests. They were to follow the directions that they were already given. In other words, they took chances beyond their station, where they were to follow the clear instructions that they were given, not respond to situations that they perceived within themselves. Back to the dry individual versus the fluid individual, and that the fluid individual only works within limits. Think about a fluid. Think about water. I must have something dry, something specific to contain it. Otherwise, right? What good does it do me? They did not respond to situations that were dictated for them. Instead, they just were internally focused in themselves. While ultimately, we have inherited both traditions to do as we are told and to take initiative, here we are focused on following the instructions clearly and not responding to a freely inspired motivation that comes to us from wherever necessarily. For without structure, Judaism would not have continuity. If everybody was just, as they say, making Shabbos for themselves or doing whatever, then we would not be in a position where we can go to any shul, we can go to any community, we can go to any number of Jewish spaces and know what to expect and know that we belong as part of the collective. And without spontaneity, it would not have a fresh life. So we need both the solid and both the liquid. We need both the idea of a fixed system and yet also the ability to adapt and adopt as the situation requires. The challenge is to maintain this balance without ever confusing the place or compromising the place of each. Safety and taking chances both always hold sway simultaneously, each in their own time and their own way. As we look at our Haftarah, we see yet more instructions that will provide needed structure so that we do not take the chances that will bring the dire results, as happened in the case of the cautionary tale of Nadav and Avihu. We go to Yechezkel chapter 45, and again, I am using the tradition of Chabad here to follow the theme, and Sfardim and Mizrachim, although I think most of us are sort of in the same place this time around. Yechezkel chapter 45, God says, and this is in reference to the actual animals that are brought as sacrifices. On the first of the month, you will bring a young bull without blemish. And we talked, I believe, last week about the many, many different blemishes and the question of, was there such a perfect creature to be found? And you shall purify this sanctuary. The priest will take the blood of the sin offering, put it on the doorpost and on the four corners of the ledge of the altar or in the doorpost of the gate of the inner court. And then it says, you shall do so on 7 days in the month, because of, it says here, and we have to be very careful, me'ish sogeh umipati, because of the presence of mistaken and simple-minded people. In other words, everything needs to be dedicated. The people that were involved had to do it just so. And what does that mean? Without being pejorative here, about the ish sogeh umipati, is that because this is a group activity and because it is fluid and that everyone is involved, the people that supervise or the people that know what they're doing or are instructing what is being done must know what they're doing. And this is in reference to Pesach. And the prince will make on that day for himself and for all the people of Israel a bull for a sin offering. And then it talks about the 7 days of the festival. Similar to our Parsha, instructions here are extensive and intensive, so that all should be done properly. This dynamic is repeated often in our Torah texts. Some people may feel excessively or start to roll their eyeballs. Why? Aviva Zornberg calls her comments on this Parsha, quote, the desire for desire, end of quote. Clearly moving out of the safety zone, so to speak. In other words, we have reached this time, coming up to Pesach, that is supposed to be full of simcha, that all the work of preparing for the celebrations and the use of the Mishkan has been completed, and now it's time to rejoice. That's the tone of the Parsha. Now it's time to rejoice. But instead, because of what has just happened, Vayidom Aharon, he's quiet, he's keeping his thoughts and his feelings and his hurt to himself, and everybody else is being given all these additional rules and regulations. We are supposed to be celebrating and feeling the dwelling of God's presence in a structure that is made by human hands, as was explained by the Chabad, by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This moment of joy is paralleled by the human reaction. As Moshe and Aharon and his sons are called to action to bring all that has been prepared into use for the benefit of all, they must remember where this can go wrong. Moshe and Aharon then do exactly what they are to do, and when all is prepared, we read at the end of Perek Tet, chapter 9, Vayisa Aharon et Yadav, Aharon raised his hands toward the people, he blessed them, he then descended from preparing the offering, both the sin offering as well as the burnt offering and the peace offering. Then Moshe and Aharon go into the tent of meeting. Vayavo Moshe v'Aharon el Ohel Moed vayatzu. They come out and they bless the people. And the glory of God appears to all. Now, in several weeks, we're going to see this notion called the democratization of Kedusha. I want you to remember that. It's going to come up when we get to Parshat Kedoshim. And Rabbi Wurzhaks is going to make the point at that time that up till now we're talking about the Kohanim, we're talking about what they're supposed to facilitate. We understand that they are participating in this thing we call Kedusha, but it's really something for everyone. How do we get to that point? And how do we do it in a way where we combine that notion of holding on to what needs to be held on to, the dry part, if you will, the law, and how do we not fly away or make a mess with the liquid part, the part that conveys what we are doing and that shares our intentions, and so on. Rashi and other commentators point out that there's a repetitive action here in our text. Why do Moshe and Aharon go into the Ohel Moed just to come out and then re-bless the people? There are instructions here that go into the actions. In other words, on the surface, this may appear rather simple, and in that case we ask why the repetition. But, says Rashi, there are hidden elements, namely instructions and scaffolding of how people are to be informed about what is to happen so that all should go according to plan, and there should not result confusion in the crowd, so to speak. Further, we are taught as follows in Torah Kohanim, relating to chapter 9, verse 16. When Aharon saw that all the sacrifices had been offered and all the procedures had been performed, and yet he did not perceive that the Shekhinah had descended for Israel, he was distressed. Now, remembering our characters, remember what happened last time? The Israelites thought that something was missing, that Moshe hadn't come down and Aharon was there. And we have that little thing called the Egel Masecha. We don't want to repeat that. So Aharon says, I know that the Holy One, blessed be God, is angry with me. Thinking back to that. And on my account, the Shekhinah has not descended to Israel. So he says to Moshe, my brother Moshe, is this what you have done to me, that I have entered and been put to shame? At once Moshe enters the tent of meeting with him. They pray for mercy. Then the Shekhinah comes down for Israel. So we see this projection or this progression of, okay, what lessons have we learned from our misdeeds and how will we do it differently next time? Here, Aharon's desire as a Kohen on behalf of the people, whatever his inner feelings were and whatever he was conveying to the others, was kept in check, in the safety zone, if you will. And he was receiving further mentoring, perhaps needed after the Egel Masecha mishap. So let's return to Nadav and Avihu. To be sure, this narrative is bothersome to many. If they loved God and they wanted to serve God, what did they do that was wrong? Maybe they show us how desire for the sake of desire, as Aviva Zornberg states, can go just too far. Not so dissimilar to the story of the Egel HaMasecha. We all know of situations where desire can turn to obsession and exist for its own sake and not that of the initial object of desire. In this case, a relationship with God. To be put simply, Moshe has his relationship with God. Aharon feels maybe something is missing and there's anger here. He goes back into the tent of meeting. He comes out. The Shekhinah is there. Now we've accomplished the next step. And we're going to see this progression as it continues to go all the way to the point of what we will talk about in about 5 weeks as the democratization of Kedusha. Meaningful relationships must have rules and limits for them to remain healthy and meaningful. And maybe that is the lesson here. It is not enough to want something so badly, but rather one has to remember why we desire what we desire and how to do so properly and safely, while taking the chances that are appropriate in order to achieve our goal. In other words, not staying in the safety zone, but staying safe by not going too far outside of it. Perhaps this is why Aharon had to go back into the tent of meeting with Moshe, why Nadav and Avihu were punished, why the Egel HaMasecha incident ends poorly, and the reason for the multitudinous rules that we are given here to keep our desires in check. In this context, this could be one of the very lessons of Kashrut, and so much else that is dictated in our Jewish lives. I'm reminded here of the Ben Sora Mora, the rebellious son, and the many discussions of what is it that the rebellious son did that was so horrible. And one of the signs of the Ben Sora Mora is one who is gluttonous in eating meat and a drunkard in drinking wine. Passionate, desirous, all of that. We're hungry, we need food, but within limits. Within limits. We must give voice and opportunity to proper desire. Keep us living with safety to the point of being debilitated by it, but learning to take the chances to be something better. and being that better person, giving voice and opportunity to proper desire, keep us from being so safe that we are paralyzed, and yet taking chances for something better while remembering to be safe. This can make us that better person that helps facilitate a better community, reaching for something wonderful, taking chances, but also doing so within protective confines. Shabbat Shalom to all, and this discussion and its themes will be continued. Lihitraat.